What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to go ahead and create a wreath design. Now before we get started, and I mentioned the requirements, it's really important to understand the process of this. We are going to create singular elements. We're going to create a leaf, we're going to create a berry, and we're going to create what I'm referring to as an additional element, which is this background piece of greenery as well. We draw them first and then we duplicate many times, and we create a central element first. We then create a left hand side. We duplicate that, put it over here, and then we grab all of the top section, we duplicate it and put it in the bottom section. So you don't need to do the whole thing all the way around. We're going to create, again, 3 elements, use them multiple times. So your layer count's going to probably get a little bit high whilst you are duplicating. So just make sure you've got plenty of layers, but as you go, maybe just squeeze them together if you need to save on your layers. And I've got 2 different background colors that you can pick from. Now, talking of colors, you're going to want the palette for today's design. You can grab the requirements for today's design over on my Patreon completely for free. There you'll find the canvas size, the palette file, and you'll also find a rough guide on how many layers it took me to create this, but by the end, your layers are only going to be 4 or 5. So once you're done with today's design, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. I release Procreate tutorials here every single week on my YouTube channel, so make sure you don't miss any of that content. But I also post 3 more tutorials over on my Patreon exclusive to my Patreon supporters. There you'll find a catalogue of over 120 exclusive tutorials, and you can see every single design over on my website before you join. That way you know that the tutorials are fit for you and you can find your favourites to get started with when you join. Again, I'll leave links to both of that in the description down below. Enjoy today's tutorial, have a wonderful Christmas, and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, we're going to go ahead and go to our colours. We're going to grab the colour in the bottom left of the palette, this dark tone for all of our outline work. And we're going to go ahead and go to our brush. We want to go to inking and the syrup brush, and we want to tap on the syrup brush because we want to go to stabilization temporarily, and we want to move our streamline up. We want to move our stabilization up as well. We want to have quite a bit of smoothing to it so we can make sure our lines are nice and smooth. So 40, 57-ish, it doesn't really matter, truthfully, the specific number. We'll hit done. Of course, one of the sizes that does matter is our brush size, and I've got it set to 20%. Now what we're going to do is we're going to draw in the holly first. We're then going to draw in the berries and then a couple of extra elements that we may need. Now what you want to do is you want to kind of draw a bit of an arc like so. So you end up with this taper at the end. Then we'll go ahead and we will swipe it to the left. We will duplicate it using duplicate, grab your cursor, and then you just want to rotate it back ever so slightly and then move it inwards so that we get this spine of our holly. You can tap on your cursor when you're done. You can see it touches at some point, it even disconnects at the end, that's fine. But you want this spine that gradually gets a little bit longer. Then you can go to your layer, you can tap on that layer and you can merge it down. So tap or merge down. And then we just want to create a very simple stem in a similar fashion. So you can go to your layers, you can create another new layer if you want to, and then just go ahead and draw in another kind of curve. You can keep it quite simple like that. And then just like before, go back to your layer, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. This time when we grab our cursor, we want to just move it across so that we get a little bit of the width of the sort of spine there, but just point it inwards towards the bottom a tiny bit. I don't necessarily want to match the spine perfectly, but I want it just to taper down into a little point down there, and tap on my cursor when I'm done. Then I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to tap on the one that we just worked on, merge it down. So the actual sort of stem here is on one layer. And I'm just going to grab my cursor, just rotate it a tiny bit because my angle just doesn't seem to match the spine correctly. So I'll tap on my cursor when I'm done. So you'll end up with this gap here. Then we're going to go ahead and create another new layer. And we're going to create the outer edge of your holly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just create a line outwards like so. And then create additional little spiky lines up towards the top there. We're going to create another line outwards. You don't want it too perfect, so just try and sort of see if you can make multiple versions and see how you can run the lines into each other. Now I quite like that shape, but I'm going to have to redo it because the top didn't run into itself perfectly. So you want to marry it up slightly. It doesn't matter if it has a little bit of a gap. Then on the same layer, so we're still on this extra new layer, we want to start towards the center here and just create sort of little spines here. So you may want to press quite firm and then a little bit lighter. You may also need to slow down your brush stroke as well, potentially. Now we're just going to marry that on the opposite side as well. So just a little bit of a curve outwards, a little bit of a curve. And these are all the kind of spines of the holly leaf. Up and into the corner. And that should do it. That's all you need to introduce. Now, potentially, this is just in case you did, if you tap on your eraser and go to something simple like calligraphy in the monoline brush, you may need to bring that size down to say 2% and just see if there's any excess that runs into this area here from these curve lines that you created. So just erase anything that ran into there. Ultimately though, that should be what we need now to crack on with our design. So let's go ahead now and merge all of our line work together by pinching them together onto one layer. We'll create a new layer and drag it underneath our leaf. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the first color in the palette, top left. And this is where you're going to need a little bit of precision. We're going to use the same brush. So we're going to fill in the inside here. And we're going to follow up there. So it's best just to sort of run up and into the spine really once you've filled this in. And I know we've got a gap, but that's more for aesthetic purposes. We're just going to try and run that line across. So we're connecting the green. And just like over here as well, we've got a gap and that's fine. We can just run into a corner, make up the corner point and then come around. And then all you want to do is follow that line all the way up and then down the opposite side. So I'm drawing as we speak. Just trying to create a general outline for it. Just making sure we don't have any gaps in there. And then again, similar fashion, you just want to kind of run green down, following this sort of shape along into your point over here, up and into the top. Now, once you've created a nice loop, you can drag and drop your color in. So with that in play, we can then start to add in more details here. So let's go to our layers. Let's create a new layer. We'll tap on this layer and we'll use the clipping mask. Now what that means is anything I now draw on this brand new layer will only show if it's on top of what we're clipped to. So I can only show the content in this area here, which is perfect. So we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, top of the second column. Our brush under the syrup brush, if we tap on it again and go to stabilization, this is just a personal preference. You may need to bring this all down so you end up with a little bit more control, and because we've got a smaller space now, you want that a little bit more control. So I brought that down to 26 and 38. It's not critical again, but it's a personal preference. So what we want to do is we want to just draw here. Notice how, again, I can't draw out here. It doesn't even show, it doesn't even matter. I'm going to run this all the way up. Doesn't matter if it spills out slightly, just all the way through the spine. That's okay, because we're going to go ahead and introduce some dark tones here. So underneath each one of these main lines, you can create a main flick, and then you can just sort of additionally add in more and more flicks here to fill out kind of the bottom area and follow the curvature of all of the sort of lines here. So every time you draw in a big line, you want to just roll that color all the way up into the corner and then follow the curvature. So you're looking at this curve and just trying to sort of mimic the curve shape progressively up and down. So once you started to do like the majority of the lines like I just did, you can then run in some slightly smaller ones in the gaps. And you don't need to fill out absolutely every single piece. You can leave gaps a little bit like that. I really like that, how that looks. But then we're just going to keep going. So again, underneath the next line above, up and into the corner. You can go right up into the corner if you really want to, just like I've done. And then we're just going to create a few. And then what I like to do is I like to sort of just space them out pretty evenly, as you saw from the last one, and then just get back in there now with some quite short lines in there as well, just to vary it up. A couple of little specks of green are fine. I like this kind of thin line that runs through there. And we're just going to keep going all the way to the very top. Now, of course, this line and this line now, the angles are all going like this. So we need to sort of roll our lines round. So we're going to run a dark line all the way up to the top. We want to just kind of pivot them all out from this central point here, pointing them up, using the taper of the pen so we're getting nice and thin on the end, up and into that corner. And then you just want to repeat for the opposite side. So the rules are exactly the same, but because of me being right-handed, it's a little bit easier to sort of do it from the spine outwards towards me on this occasion rather than outwards. And you may find that that's a little bit more comfortable. It's just whatever angle fits you best. So again, I'm going to just run that up and into the corner. And then I'm looking at the opposite side as I'm doing this and just trying to triple check I'm not adding in too much, or I'm not, going in a completely different direction. I just want to make sure that the sort of styles on both sides are very similar to each other. And again, we'll just create all of the curves following the kind of curvature of the leaf, trying to show that it's a little bit sort of bowed in the middle almost. So this one here takes a little bit of time just to sort of fill out, but you end up some really nice color. And we've got some highlight tones to introduce as well. So this isn't going to be the final color that we introduce, but it's going to be our nice shadowy tone. So we're just going to keep going, a couple of gaps. And again, when we get towards the top here, I'm going to run it up and then just pivot out into that sort of point and then curve it round at the very top. So if we straighten it up, this is what we should have at this stage. We can then go to our layers, we create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it, and we add in the next color. I always like to separate my colors in case I need to make adjustments. So I'm going to grab the top of the third column and we're going to add in some new rules. So every time there's a point and a line from the outer edge, I want you to run it in and then somewhat kind of follow the line down, not all the way into the spine, but just following inwards from the outer edge. So you can have some quite chunky lines. I would urge you to sort of do it a few times. So you're just trying to run that line into there. Likewise at the very top as well, you can run it down here on top of that line again. And that one I went all the way down to the spine, and that's fine. I don't mind that necessarily. It adds in some nice variety. The only thing you want to make sure is when you bring that line in, it just kind of tapers itself underneath the black line. So basically it gets a little bit thinner. We also want to go ahead and brighten up the spine as well. We want the spine to be quite bright. So we're going to go all the way through it, all the way to the very, very top. Notice how I've started a little bit lighter with my pressure, gone a little bit heavier, and I've left the gap as well. So let's go ahead and just get rid of that with our razor and then go back to our brush. Now we've got more color to introduce here though, with the same color. So for example, you just want to sort of bring in from the outer edge some highlight tones, and they don't necessarily even need to sort of completely come from the outer edge underneath the black line. They can just be in the middle like so. Really try and vary it up if you can, but keep the pressure nice and thin on the end, so you end up with that lovely tapered effect. Taper is basically where the end of the brush gets a little bit thinner into a very thin point, and that's what we want to try and come across with our line work, that every single one of them got a very thin taper to it. And I've got this area here, and I might actually just kind of chunk this area out a bit more, and then just like before, we'll go all the way to the very top. So just introducing a few areas here. You want to try and make sure that you do leave space for your original green though. That's why I'm randomly trying to allocate some color in there. I'm just going to add in some more along the top edge, and then maybe a few that just come in from the very top. And again, I'm going to rotate because it's a little bit easier again for me just to flick this way. And then again, I don't have to necessarily have them come from the outer edge. I can zigzag them on the inner edge there. So just be inside of that black line. You can leave gaps like I've just done as well. It's not critical. But we're just being bold with the pen strokes just to try and add in some nice effective strokes so we can see them. It's very obvious that you can see the bold brush strokes. And then we've got a final highlight color. So we're going to go to our layers again, create another new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it, go to your colors and grab then the top of the fourth column. This is your final color. And so what we'll do is with this bright tone, we're going to go all the way down the right hand side there of our spine, introducing this bright tone. I want to go ahead and go down the edges here, just introducing a brighter bit of color. It doesn't have to be everywhere. For example, it goes in here. Now I've started out here, it brings itself in and then leaves nice and bold so that you don't end up with just a perfect outline. That's not really what we're going for. I'll follow down here and then I'll draw out the shape. And this is the beauty of clipping masks. Sometimes you can be really bold with it and then sort of just use them to hide your brush strokes. So you can come in from out here, up and in, and then come back out. And it just looks like it's meant to be nice and tapered, as we've been saying. A little bit of color up there too. And if you want to, you could be a little bit more bold by introducing, say, like a couple of highlights in there, say on top of those edges, maybe even a random stray line or two on top of the spines maybe. For me, I think I could do a better job of brightening them up. So I'll do exactly that with the occasional little patch of the brightest tone here. Just making sure I add some in a few different random areas, a couple of little scrapes. But ultimately, that's what your holly leaf should look like. That's our final sort of guide for what we need. So that is one element done. What we can now do is when you're happy, make sure you are happy, you pinch all of your layers into one layer. So you've got just your leaf on one layer. We'll then go ahead and create a new layer because I want you to have this one for proportion to work it out. So let's go to our colors again. Go bottom left of the palette. We want to be on a new layer as I've just created. Your brush still wants to be the same one. The only thing you want to do now is create a kind of circular shape here. It does not need to be perfect in terms of a circular shape. I've just gone round and linked perfectly back into to create a kind of circle shape like this. We're then going to go ahead, create a new layer. We'll drag it underneath our little circle we just created. And you can tap on the actual circle, tap on it and use the reference tool. Now what happens now is every layer now looks at that layer as a guide. So if I go to our brand new layer underneath, I go to my colors and grab the first color in the middle row, drag it into that space. Even though there's nothing on this empty layer, it's looking at the layer above as to what to do. Now if I tap on this layer and turn off the reference, it's all done. Now with that in play, we can then go ahead and tap on this layer here. We can create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it. We'll go to our layer and we'll bring the opacity down to around about say 35%. I think that'll be fine. If we go to our colors, we grab then the middle of the second row. So middle of that second row of colors. So middle of the second column otherwise. We're just going to give ourselves a little bit of a shadow. So I'm going to wrap this round here and make it a little bit bigger than that. That's fine. And then potentially just a tiny bit over the top. Again, we're clipped, so we have that kind of effect where we can come in and out of the layer without actually sort of showing all of our empty work on the outside. Then we're going to go ahead and go to our layers again, create another new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it, and set the opacity again, but to around about say 45%. Doesn't really matter to the number because we're just going to then wrap around another shadow, but a little bit lower down than the last one. So you kind of want to wrap it around the bottom here of our berry. And that's all we want to do. Nice and simple. The final thing to do is add a highlight. So we create another new layer. We tap on it. We'll clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab then the third color out of the red, so middle of the third column. And we'll add in a lovely little highlight here in the top left. That's all we need to do. Nice and simple. Now the final thing we have to do is just add in a very simple detail. Now what we'll do is we'll go to the layer that's got the actual circle line on it. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the color in the bottom left of the palette. And all you need to do is just create the top of the berry. And that just needs to be like a simple, very light amount of pressure kind of ring shape here. A couple of scrapes is fine. Just a little something like that on the berry just to show that that is the end of it. So a little something like that, nice and simple. That's another element done. Now we're going to go ahead and create our third element. So I'm going to pinch these all together now for the berry. So they're all on one layer and the leaf is on its own layer. We're creating all these elements that we can then reuse for our wreath. So we're then going to create a new layer and then going to go ahead using the same dark tone again. I'm going to use this one as a bit of a guide because I'm going to go ahead and just draw in a bit of a line like this. I want to introduce some additional kind of leafy style content that we can fill out the rest of our design with. And then with that, I want to create some petals on the end. Now it's totally up to you. You can create a new layer and draw one petal and then just duplicate it because sometimes they can be a little bit daunting to do. So you want to go ahead and find a bit of a gap and then just create a little bit of a shape like this. And you can draw it multiple times. Don't feel like you need to draw it all in one go like I've just done. But as long as you connect it then at the bottom, like so, you've got one of your petals. So as I mentioned, you can just go ahead and do this one and then duplicate it. Or you can draw them all the way up. I'm going to go ahead and just do the one. And just like before, we'll go ahead and create a new layer. We'll drag it underneath our petal and we'll tap on the petal itself and use the reference tool. We'll then go back to my empty layer, go to the colors. We'll go ahead and we will grab then this tone here. I want the middle of the sixth column, drag it into that space. I'm then going to go ahead and go to my layer. I'm then going to go ahead and create a new layer. We'll tap on it. We'll go ahead and clipping mask it. We'll add a basic shadow to it. So we'll go to our opacity. We'll bring it down again to around about say 40%. We'll go to our colors. We'll go ahead and grab this tone here. It's the middle of the second column from the right. And just add in a bit of a shadow to the underside there. And then we'll go to our layers. We'll create a new layer. You don't have to necessarily clip this. We're just going to go to our colors and grab the top of the sixth column. And just add in a streak of green through there as well. So right up to the very top underneath. So you should end up with just something very, very simple. It's not meant to be too detailed, very simple. Now what you can also go ahead and do is if you've got your line on a separate layer, you can swipe that to the left as well and duplicate it. And just like we did before, you can grab your cursor and rotate it slightly and then move it outwards again. So you end up with a slightly thicker stem to it. Now you may want to just reduce that curve because it's exaggerated the longer the line, and then tap on your cursor when you're done. Then go back to your lines, tap on them, merge it down so they're both on one layer. create a new layer, and then drag it underneath your line. Then go back to your colors, grab the yellow again in the middle of the 6th column, and just take your time, just run it all the way up here. So I'm just gonna fill in that gap all the way up. Doesn't matter if there's actually any gaps as well, it's perfectly fine. Like the odd little pixel won't really matter too much in the long run, all the way up to the very top, like so. And then we'll go back to our layers. We'll go ahead and pinch the 2 layers for the column or the stem together. And then the petal, you can pinch those layers together now. Swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Grab your cursor and you can flip it horizontally, rotate it round and position it on the outer edge again. And just keep duplicating that all the way up, scaling it down as you go. I would create nice random rotations to it. So swiping it to the left, rotating it all the way up. Try and rotate it a bit more inwards as you get further up. Again, don't forget the other side as well. Sometimes it can be really helpful to do both at the exact same time. And I'm just gonna occasionally just rotate it, scale it down, position it slightly off from each other, but just keep going all the way up, keeping it nice and small right towards the top. And again, just duplicating. That's all I'm doing, just very quickly sort of duplicating it right up to the top until you get to a very small one at the very top end like that. And then I would urge you to go back to the very big ones at the bottom, because once you've done all of them in descending size, I recommend that the bottom one is also smaller as well. So we go to the bottom one, scale it down in size. I want it to go small into medium and large, and then into a medium, maybe small again. So a little something like that. And then go back to the largest one on the right, grab your cursor, scale it down in size. I'm going to put it like that. Tap on my cursor when I'm done. So we've got 3 elements now that we can now use for our wreath. So we can go to our layers, we can pinch all of the additional layers, excluding the berry and the leaf together. So it's this new element we created, and we've got all 3 of them. Now what I recommend we do at this point is we actually swipe from left to right on all 3, and we group them together and we just call it elements, because this will be our kind of folder that we can come back to, that we can then grab each element that we need. So let's turn off that group. We'll collapse it down and turn it off just temporarily. We'll then go to our layers and create a new layer. We'll go to our colors and we will just grab black. You can double tap at the bottom of the disk. Now, if we go ahead and draw in a circle in the middle of the screen and pop one finger on the screen as well, it will snap it to a perfect circle. So you hold your pen at the end and then pop one finger on the screen and then grab your cursor, tap on it. Make sure you use snapping in the bottom left and drag that into the center of your design. Now you'll get these 2 orange lines, which lets you know that we are nice and centered. Tap on your cursor and then go to your layer, tap on it and bring its opacity right down. You just want it as a bit of a guide. So about say 7% is perfectly fine. Now we're going to go ahead and create 1/2 of our wreath and then duplicate it on the opposite side. So we want to open up our elements. Your layers may get a tiny bit sort of all over the place to start with, but learn to sort of merge them together. But if you can keep hold of your layers for a while, I urge you to do so. Now we're going to start off with the leaf, so we can swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We'll turn on one of them and we'll just drag it up and out of the group, and I'll turn off the group again. So I've got my leaf up here. I'm going to grab my cursor. I'm going to use uniform, scaling it down in size, maybe rotating it. And I'm going to position it up here at the top. We want to have a central point where the leaves are a little bit larger. So we're going to have a central point here. Once we duplicate it and flip it over, it'll also be reflected on the opposite side. So I'm going to have some big leaves up here. And then I'll swipe that one to the left and duplicate it. I don't necessarily need to go into the group. I'll flip it horizontal. I'll move it out of the way. I'll also rotate it slightly as well, like so. Now, additionally, you may start to think, hang on, this looks a bit too repetitive. You can always use the warp tool. You can move a leaf around, really adjust it, squidge it in different directions, really try and create some variation between them, even stunt it at the end if you really want to. Just have some fun. Just remember that that's an option though, to tap on your cursor when you're done. Now, before we carry on, I want to go ahead and grab one of the berries. So I'll swipe that to the left and duplicate it. I'll drag it up and out of the group. I'll collapse the group down again. I've got one of my berries and I'll grab my cursor. I'll use uniform and I'll scale it down in size. I'm going to have a central point in the middle. So I'm going to just scale it down to say here. And then I'm going to grab my layer, swipe it to the left and duplicate it as well. And then move that into place. You've got all of these elements now. You can create whatever you want, really. You can just use all of the content that we've previously created. Of course, we've got the other element to create, which is these kind of additional addition sort of elements of leaves. So I'm going to swipe that to the left and duplicate it, drag it out of the group. I'll collapse the group down. Additional element, we'll grab our cursor, use uniform and scale it down in size, and we'll start to just flush it out. These ones can be very small. These are meant as filler. That's literally all they're intended for. Sorry guys, just a little bit of filler in the background amongst all of your holly and leaves and berries. So let's go ahead and just continue on with our holly first and then use these elements to fill the gaps. So this may take a little bit of time, but it's quite fun. We're going to grab our leaves and just keep scaling them down, rotating them, scaling them up as well if you really want to. Be aware of layering. So if you layer them on top, that's perfectly fine. Just don't have like corners here touching. You don't want corners, you want things overlapped and having unique positions. You don't want things ever running into corners. It's just a golden rule really. And then I'm going to swipe that to the left and duplicate it. I'll grab my cursor. I could rotate it round and just simply have it sort of pointing upwards like that, or I could flip it vertically, rotate it, continue just to find some position for it. You could even use freeform and distort to widen the leaf. You could use distort to sort of obscure some of the angles maybe and make it a little bit sort of more quirky to look at. Widen it, stretch it. There's all sorts of tools that we can use to just make things look a little bit more unique. Now I'm going to run that through there. That looks pretty good, if not a little bit more rotation, just to get rid of the curve a bit more. Tap on my cursor when I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more berries. So I'm going to duplicate them, grab my cursor, scale them down in size as well. So I'm going to use uniform and just scale them down. So we've got some variation in here. Now the berries are really useful for just tidying up a few additional lines. For example, I could go ahead and swipe that one to the left and just move that one just over here potentially as well, just to hide a little bit of that kind of content, and rearrange the berries as well, put them in different sort of or layered sort of stacks. I want to find the large one there, grab my cursor and just move it across to the right. There we go. So just continue to use all the elements again to flush it out. But we're going to go ahead now and go down this side. Then what we do on this side, we'll duplicate and put it on this side, and then we'll grab all of it and flip it and put it on the opposite side. So it'll all make sense. Let's then go through our leaves first, because they're quite an important element. So I'm going to grab one of the leaves, grab my cursor. Now, the one leaf that I'm going to use, I'm going to go ahead and move it all the way to the bottom, just in front of the ring. And then these layers that we put up here, because this is a central point, I'm going to swipe from left to right on all of those and group them together. So if you go ahead and group them together, hit the arrow and turn it on and off, you'll be able to see that content, and that is correct. We want to grab our new leaf and move it across, because again, what we draw on this left hand side now, or add to the left hand side should I say, we're going to go ahead and duplicate in a minute. So I'm just going to scale that down. There we go. I'm then going to go ahead and go into that group and grab one of the berries and swipe it to the left and duplicate it and drag it down to where that leaf is. And then while I'm here, I'll also grab the additional content, swipe that to the left and duplicate it and drag that out of the group as well. So now I can go up to the top, I can turn that group down, and I've got 3 elements I can now mess with. So grabbing the berry, I'll grab my cursor, move it across, I'll put it into position, scale it down maybe, and progressively you kind of want to start factoring that in, that maybe a few of the elements we put towards these outer edges are going to get a little bit smaller. Now they don't even need to touch the berries, but I think they look quite uniformed like that. Then grab the leaf again, duplicate, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip it horizontal and then rotate it round. Now you've got to be careful with that, because we still want it to follow the curvature of the actual circular reef shape. I'm going to come down into here. I can tuck that under there if I want to, so I can go ahead and go to my layers, just move it underneath, grab the berry, swipe it to the left and duplicate, and then maybe just try and put one, say over here, but again, that needs to go underneath. So we're staggering things backwards as well at the same time. You can go ahead and swipe the leaf to the left, duplicate it, scale it down, rotate it, and maybe even have an additional one in here, or even flip it horizontal, rotate it and put it into this space here. There we go, that looks quite nice. And I'm constantly thinking about, could I then have a little bit of this filler element in the gaps, and that will be quite important later. So we'll go round the side a bit more, duplicate a leaf, flip it horizontal, let's rotate it again. Maybe I'll leave a bit of a gap this time, but I'll scale it down even more, and then maybe I'll try to have like a couple of leaves here connected from a similar point. So I'm just duplicating the layer again, Couple of leaves connected into here. That looks nice. And then I can use the berries to just get in there and sort of somewhat try to connect it all together. So just a couple of berries in there. Again, we can use the filler content. We don't have to have it all fully connected. Now, what you're looking for kind of I know I've put mine slightly off to the left, so I'm looking for a slightly diagonal line here. And then once I feel like I've got to the point where I've kind of got to that area, I want to grab all the filler content. That's really important now. So we've got the filler content, swipe it to the left and duplicate. Grab your cursor, rotate it round and move it down and into the gaps. So rotate it, push it down, and start filling it out. Now you will need to go to your layer and drag that all the way to the bottom, down to where your guide circle is, because we do want it at the back ideally. And then just keep duplicating that, scale it down, rotate it, position it, and try to hide all of the lines as well. So you want to try and make sure that you don't have just a random stem pointing out. You want to kind of hide it underneath the leaves before. And you want to try and connect the elements together. So if you can, a little line like this will look great. And I'll grab my cursor, I'll move that up and out of the way, because that now needs to just, there we go. Lovely. Swipe it to the left and duplicate. Just keep going. This is really quite therapeutic, I think, because you can just keep adding more and more content to flush it out with. You've got all of the elements you need to do so. Just keep rotating, keep scaling them up and down and flushing it out. And you can sit as long as you like, connecting everything together. You can then get back into it and think, hang on, maybe I could do with an additional leaf here. So I'll grab it, I'll scale it down. The leaf can be on its own. It could even be rotated and pointing the opposite way and connecting from these berries. Just be careful if you do that, because it might throw the eye off slightly, but use leaves as filler as well. So we're carrying on, and we're going to get all the way up into here, rotate that up to that point there. And I think that's almost coming together nicely. I think we're almost done there. Now, one thing you can do at this stage is just add some variety to the leaves. Now, what I mean by that is you can go to the leaves themselves. Let's find one. That one there. That's perfectly fine. We're going to zoom in on him. We're going to go to our adjustments. We're going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And you can just tone the saturation down. You can tone the brightness down if you wanted to, or even make it a little bit brighter. But notice how the colors now look so much more different. We can change the hue. Now, I wouldn't change the hue very much. I'd go 1% down, 1% up. So 51 or 49. And then just vary it up and down with your hue, saturation, and brightness. And then repeat that. So find another leaf, that one there. Perfect. Let's go back to our hue, saturation, and brightness. Let's scale it up or even down. I reckon down looks nice because we've got some nice variety. And all I'm going to do on this occasion is bring it down to about 30%. And I just need to make sure I do that all the way up through the leaves. So some of them you want to keep completely fine. And then some of them you may want to just make them a little bit unique and different. So I'm looking for a particular leaf. I'm looking for that one there. I'm going to go to my hue, saturation, and brightness. I might change the hue slightly up and then bring that saturation down. And then I'll tap on my hue, saturation when I'm done. And then up here in our main element, I will add a little bit of variety to that as well. So up into that top group that we created, and I'm going to grab that leaf, hue, saturation, and brightness, and just change it. So bring the saturation down a little bit, bring the hue up, maybe even brighten it slightly, and then find another one in there as well. So I'm going to go to the right one, adjustments, hue, saturation, and brightness, and just bring it down or up. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now your wreath will have so much more variety in each one of the leaves. It just makes it look a little bit more sort of unique and almost like you drew absolutely every single element. You can do that. So let's collapse that main center point down. That center point is there, remember. We've got all of the elements in behind, the additional sort of pieces of content. You're more than welcome to do the same thing. Go to your hue, saturation, and brightness and bring it down a little bit, sort of making it a bit more gray. Either will look fine. We've used quite bold colors to start with, so we've got lots of color that we can mess around with. I'm going to make sure that this left-hand side here is nice and fully packed in. So I'm just going to continue just to add in a few more elements here before I'm ready to move on to the next stage, which is a really important one. So we just need to make sure we're happy with how filled in every single element is here, making sure there's a good amount of content in the gaps as well. You just want to make sure it's nice and full. I'm just going to keep going, grab my cursor, rotate that round, and I think I could probably get away with just tucking one really right underneath there to keep adding in that circular shape. And I know our layers are getting a little bit crazy, but in a minute they're going to get quite reduced. So for a minute they're a little bit nuts. And sometimes that happens with this type of thing, especially when you're just repeating elements. I'm just flipping and rotating as we speak, but sometimes that happens with your layers. So once you get to this stage here, and this left-hand side is done, you can then start to merge things together. So pinch everything together. So we're looking for everything but up here. So this group here of our center point needs to stay. So everything below, just go nuts and start pinching everything together onto one layer. So if I now turn this on and off, we'll see where we are. Now I can see if I turn it on and off, tapping away, I've got all of the content left of that center point. I can now swipe that to the left, duplicate it, grab my cursor, flip it horizontal, and then rotate it around. I've got an additional element there by mistake to a degree, and that's fine. I just want to now make sure that this sits on the circle nicely, like so. You may need to start moving a few things around, but for me, I'm quite happy with it. The only thing I'm going to do up there in that center point is in that group is duplicate the additional element, grab my cursor and just rotate it around so that I can put some in the bottom area here as well. So I'm just going to duplicate them just to flush that out a tiny bit more, like so, and try and look for little gaps to fill. Now, once you've done half of your wreath, you guessed it, we can just collapse all of it down. So you need to make sure you're happy with this top area, but once you're happy, pinch them together. So you've got all of it on one layer, swipe it to the left and duplicate it, grab your cursor, flip it vertically, flip it horizontally, and then move it down to the bottom half. Now, you should hopefully have a gap. If you don't and it overlaps, that's perfectly fine. Just get in there and start erasing, to be honest with you. So once I've got it centered like this, and I'm looking for sort of being adjacent to the top, I'll tap on my cursor. And then in these gaps here, you can now go back into your elements and just find new things like an additional leaf, swipe it to the left and duplicate it, move it underneath the two areas, grab your cursor, scale it down in size, and then pop that in a gap, scale it down maybe, rotate it, just so that one side's a little bit more unique than the other. So you can just fit that in there if you can. That looks nice. And I might even do that on the opposite side by swiping that to the left and duplicating it, grabbing my cursor, I'll flip it vertically and I'll flip it horizontally and I'll move it across into the gap. So you've got one element from top and bottom that just connects them together. Now the really cool thing with this is if we go to our layers now and we pinch all of the wreath together again onto one layer, is adding in a shadow. So if we go ahead first of all and we add in a background color. So if we tap on background color, over here I've got two areas for the background. Originally I had the blue and then I moved to a lighter, warmer tone. I quite like the warmer tone, but I gave you both options. Now, the top color is the background color and the color underneath is its subsequent shadow color. So whichever color you use here, the blue or the kind of peachy tone, you can go ahead and use the subsequent shadow. So I'm going to use the peachy tone, hit done. I'm then going to go to my wreath, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out the two, tap on it, alpha lock it, go back to your colors and grab then the shadow tone for it. Then go back to your layer, tap on it and fill it. Then tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. Go to your adjustments, go to gauge and blur, swipe from left to right, adding in roughly around about say a 7% gauge and blur. Then go to your cursor and then you can drag it down. You can even scale it down just a tiny bit using uniform, just scale it down just a tiny bit. But I like a top down shadow. You can even move it slightly off to the right if you want a bit more of a sort of angle to the lighting, but if you keep it the same size, all the shadow distance will be quite similar. So it's totally up to you really. It's more this inner shadow that I really like. So if I tap on my cursor, we can then go ahead and add in our final element, which is just going to be some text in the middle. So we want to go ahead and go right to the top of our layers. And by the way, if you've still got your circle guide, you can swipe it to the left and delete it. Your elements are still there just in case you want to go back in and add some more, but you just need to follow the same steps as we did before. So we're going to create a new layer at the top. Now, whatever shadow color you used, i.e. depending on which color you use for the background, you want to keep the shadow color selected. So I'm going to grab the shadow color for the background color I selected. I'm going to go up to my actions. I'm going to go to add, and I'm going to add some text. So I'm going to add text. Then you'll get this here. It'll just say text to start with. Double tap on it. You'll get this menu pop up, and then tap on your font, and we can change it. And then I'm going to go ahead and use this one here. I've scrolled down in my fonts on the left-hand side to Snell Round Hand. And then I've tapped on that. You can make it slightly more bold if you want to, like black or bold. And then if you go ahead and tap on this element here to get your keyboard, sometimes it doesn't show, so you have to double tap on it, grab this icon here and go show keyboard. And you want to change that to Merry, of course. Grab your cursor, move it down into the center, then go to your layer, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Grab either one of them, it doesn't matter, but if you tap on it and go to edit text, you'll then be able to double tap on the text and just start typing straight away. So Christmas, and then grab your cursor, move it down, and then you can scale these up and down just to fit in the center of your wreath really. I think Christmas should be slightly higher than it should be. And then go to Merry, grab your cursor, move it down as well. Make sure they don't touch. But I think we could also go ahead and tap on our cursor. If we tap on Merry, for example, and we edit the text, I want to double tap on the text. I want to go to the weight here and change it from, I don't like necessarily the sort of chunkier text sizes. I'm going to go to regular and then tap on my cursor when I'm done and just fit that in there as well. So I don't mind the Y touching. One thing you want to look for is the center point of your canvas, which is this orange line here. That'll let you know your sort of text there is nice and centered. And I'll do the same for Christmas as well. So let's just make sure that that is nice and centered. It might be slightly off to the left, more than you imagine actually. So I'm just going to move mine, keep tinkering with it. I think I'm happy with the Y to run into the T ever so slightly. I don't really mind it that much. And just keep messing though. And by all means use a different font as well if you don't like the look of the one I've selected. But once you're done, you can go ahead and pinch with 2 fingers. You can go full screen with 4 and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this wreath design. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you could subscribe to the channel, that'd be amazing. I post weekly tutorials here for Procreate on my YouTube channel. I also post 3 more every single month to my Patreon supporters as well. The catalogue of exclusive tutorials that I've released for my Patreon supporters sits at well over 120 at the time of recording. With 3 added every single month, it just continues to grow. And you can check out every single tutorial design over on my website before you join. That way you know that the content is fit for you or not. Again, I'll leave links to both of that in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you will love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you in the next one.